He was Lee Jin-woo, the millionaire CEO, cold and widowed, whose life was a succession of meetings and solitude. She was Kim Min-ji, the humble cleaner, who took the job at the mansion where no one could stand the boss, simply to give her son, Kim Ji-hoon, a future. One day, exhausted, Jin-woo arrived home and what he saw paralyzed him. His daughter, Lee Ha-eun, dancing with the cleaner's son, in a scene of pure joy he never imagined possible in his somber home. This unexpected melody not only broke the mansion's silence, but also the ice in his heart. But when Jin-woo's mother tried to humiliate Min-ji, accusing her of opportunism, the CEO, for the first time, found himself forced to choose between status and the woman who, unintentionally, brought light back into his life. Could love blossom where it was least expected, between a cold chaebol and the cleaner who dared to bring joy into his house? The air in the living room, previously filled with the innocent melody of a children's dance, froze. The cutting words of Mrs. Lee, Jin-woo's mother, hung like a toxic mist, suffocating the little light that had dared to penetrate that home. Kim Min-ji, the cleaner, felt her face burn. Her eyes, previously fixed on the children, now lowered, seeking refuge in the polished gleam of the marble floor. The humiliation was a heavy burden, and the fear of losing her only means of livelihood, of failing to protect her son, was even greater. Ji-hoon, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, still held Ha-eun's hand, but the joy on his face began to wilt, replaced by childish confusion. Jin-woo, in turn, felt an unexpected warmth rise up his spine. It wasn't anger, not exactly, but a deep irritation, an instinctive defense. His mother, with her impeccable posture and judgmental gaze, represented everything he had internalized about status, reputation, and the coldness necessary to survive in the world of chaebols. But in that instant, those rules seemed hollow. The image of Ha-eun, his daughter, smiling in a way he rarely saw, dancing with a freedom he had never provided her, directly confronted his mother's accusation. Opportunism. Or could it be the purest and simplest joy? He observed Min-ji. She didn't defend herself, didn't raise her voice. She merely recoiled slightly, a silent dignity in her defeated posture. That passivity, paradoxically, ignited something in Jin-woo. He was accustomed to seeing people fighting for scraps, for positions, for attention. Min-ji, however, seemed only to want to disappear, to protect her son from that whirlwind. And it was this vulnerability, this absence of artifice, that propelled him. Mother. Jin-woo's voice sounded firmer than he expected, cutting through the oppressive silence. Please, stop. Mrs. Lee turned to him, shock plastered across her face. No one dared to contradict her, much less her own son, the heir to her empire. Jin-woo, what are you saying? Don't you see what's happening here? This woman is using our house, our daughter, for her own ends. She is working, Jin-woo replied, his voice gaining an intensity that surprised everyone, including himself. And Ha-eun was happy. I've never seen her so happy. Jin-woo's words echoed through the room, a declaration that was both a defense and a confession. Min-ji looked up, surprised. She expected to be fired, reprimanded, but not defended. Not by him. The cold, distant CEO, the man who barely looked her in the eye, was now placing himself between her and his mother. Mrs. Lee gasped, fury replacing shock. Happiness. You call this happiness, Jin-woo? Letting a cleaner's child get close to Ha-eun? Have you forgotten who we are? Where is your common sense? My common sense tells me my daughter has the right to have friends, Jin-woo retorted, stepping forward, his imposing figure now closer to his mother than to Min-ji. He wasn't shouting, but the authority in his voice was unquestionable. And if Ji-hoon's presence brings joy to Ha-eun, then I see no problem at all. Min-ji's eyes widened. It was an unexpected defense, a protection she never imagined receiving. Her heart pounded, a mix of relief and dread. Relief at not being immediately fired, dread at the consequences this defense could bring for Jinwoo himself and inevitably for her. Mrs. Lee was livid. "Are you defying me, Jinwoo, because of a cleaner and her son?" Her voice was a dangerous whisper, laden with threat. "I am defending what is right for my daughter," Jinwoo affirmed, his gaze fixed on his mother's. It was a silent battle of wills, one he rarely won against her. But today, something was different. The image of Ha-yun laughing, the melody of that dance had taken root in his icy heart, and he would not allow it to be torn out. Ha-yun, sensing the tension, finally let go of Ji-hoon's hand and ran to her father, hugging his legs. "Daddy, Ji-hoon is my friend. He taught me how to dance." The child's innocence, amidst the adult storm, was a blow to Mrs. Lee. She looked at her granddaughter, then at her son, and finally at Minji, who now held Ji-hoon close to her, her eyes downcast. The defeat, however small, was bitter. "This won't stand, Jinwoo," Mrs. Lee hissed, her voice low and full of dark promises. "You don't know what you're doing." With one last scathing look at Minji, she turned and left the room, her footsteps echoing on the marble, each one a drumbeat announcing a war that was just beginning. The silence that followed Mrs. Lee's exit was heavy, but different. It was no longer the oppressive silence of judgment, but the silence of surprise, of uncertainty. Jinwoo let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He looked at Ha-eun, who was still hugging him, and then at Minji. Her eyes met his for a brief moment. There was gratitude, yes, but also a deep caution, a tacit understanding of the line that had been crossed. He had defended his daughter, and by extension, her and her son, against his own mother. It was an unthinkable act for the cold CEO, a deviation from his carefully constructed character. "Minji-si," Jinwoo began, his voice now softer, almost hesitant. "Please continue your work, and don't worry about my mother." Minji nodded, unable to utter a word. That man, the boss she feared and respected from a distance, had revealed himself to be something more complex. He had seen his daughter's joy, and that had been enough to make him defy the world that had shaped him. As Jinwoo picked up Ha-eun, feeling the warmth of his daughter, he couldn't help but feel a new kind of warmth spreading through his chest. It was the feeling of having done the right thing, not out of social obligation, but out of a genuine impulse. And, at the same time, a new awareness of Minji. She was no longer just the cleaner. She was the woman who, unintentionally, had lit a light in his dark house, and now, somehow, in his own heart. The unexpected melody had become a symphony, and he was just beginning to hear its first chords. But the dissonant notes of his mother's disapproval already promised a conflict that would test the limits of everything he believed himself to be. The echo of Mrs. Lee's footsteps faded, but the shadow of her wrath remained, hovering over the room like an omen. Jinwoo felt the weight of the silence, a silence different from all others he had experienced in that mansion. It wasn't the usual emptiness, but a quietude laden with consequences, with newly made choices and an uncertain future. He still held Ha-eun, the warmth of his daughter a tangible reminder of what he had defended. The scent of her hair, the lightness of her body against his, were anchors in a sea of uncertainties. His eyes, almost by instinct, sought Minji. She was turned away from him, crouching, hugging Ji-hoon. Her posture radiated a mix of relief and a vulnerability that struck him in an unexpected way. He had defied his mother, the unshakable matriarch of the Lee family, for a cleaner and her son. The irony was not lost on him. The cold CEO, the man who measured every word and every movement in his corporate empire, had acted on an impulse, on a vision of pure joy that had broken his ice. Minji, in turn, felt her heart pound in her chest. Jinwoo's words, his unexpected defense, still resonated in her ears. It was as if an invisible barrier had been broken. The distant boss, almost a mythical figure in his own home, had become a protector. But his protection came with a price she feared would be too high for both of them. Mrs. Lee was not a woman who accepted no for an answer, much less an open challenge from her son. The veiled threats in her voice echoed, promising retribution. "Ji-hoon, let's finish our work," Min-ji whispered to her son. Her voice choked. She needed to compose herself, to move away from that epicenter of tension before the situation became even more unbearable. Ji-hoon, with a child's innocence, looked at Ha-eun, who was still in her father's arms, and waved with a shy smile. Ha-eun, noticing Ji-hoon's movement, stretched out her little hand. "Don't go, Ji-hoon, let's dance again." Ha-eun's plea, so pure and unpretentious, struck Jin-woo in the chest. He looked at Min-ji, who hesitated, torn between obedience and his daughter's wish. That was the crucial point, the reason for his defense. Ha-eun's happiness. "Min-ji, see," Jin-woo said, his voice softer than usual, but still carrying a subtle authority. "There's no rush. Let them play a little longer." Min-ji turned, her eyes wide with surprise. He was asking her not to work, for her son to continue playing with his daughter after everything that had happened. It was a request that defied all the unspoken rules of that house, all the hierarchies she had learned to respect. "Sir, I don't know if it's appropriate," she began, her voice almost inaudible. The fear of being misunderstood, of appearing opportunistic, still tormented her. Jin-woo set Ha-eun down, who immediately ran to Ji-hoon. He took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "Min-ji, see," he repeated, his gaze firm but without its usual coldness. "I said it's fine. My daughter. She needs this." The last sentence was almost a whisper, a confession he didn't expect to make. Min-ji felt a shiver. That man, the unattainable CEO, was revealing a facet she never imagined existed. He wasn't just defending his daughter, but also acknowledging a need, a void in his own life that Ji-hoon and she somehow had filled. Gratitude mingled with a strange sense of responsibility. She had brought joy, yes, but also an immense complication to his life. As the children resumed their improvised dance, now with a little more caution, Jin-woo observed Min-ji. She wasn't like the other people in his circle. There was no artifice, no calculation, just a raw honesty in her eyes, a silent strength that contrasted with her apparent fragility. He wondered what motivated her to remain in such a hostile environment, to endure his coldness and his mother's arrogance. The answer, he knew, lay in Ji-hoon. Just as his own motivation lay in Ha-eun, the tension in the room didn't completely dissipate, but it transformed. From an open confrontation, it became a silent expectation. Jin-woo knew that the battle with his mother was far from over. She was a ruthless strategist, and his public defiance would not be forgotten. He could feel the gears of his Chaebol world beginning to turn, the gossip, the pressures, the attempts to undermine his authority and his decision. But for the first time in a long time, Jin-woo felt a clarity. The sight of Ha-eun laughing, the melody of that dance, had ignited something within him that was stronger than the fear of his mother's disapproval, stronger than the expectations of his status. He had defended his daughter's happiness, and in doing so, he had defended something more, something he couldn't yet name, but felt deeply. Min-ji, watching their children dance, felt a warmth spread in her chest, a warmth that rivaled the fear. That man, with his aura of power and his dark past, had become an unexpected ally. But the path ahead seemed like a tightrope, stretched over an abyss. She was just a cleaner, he was a CEO. The distance between their worlds was immense, and the bridge that had been built by an innocent dance seemed fragile. Jin-woo, noticing Min-ji's gaze, met her eyes again. This time, the contact was longer, more significant. There was a silent question in his eyes, and perhaps an unspoken promise. He didn't know what the future would bring, but one thing was certain. The unexpected melody had become the soundtrack to a new and dangerous journey, and he was just beginning to hear its first chords. But the dissonant notes of his mother's disapproval already promised a conflict that would test the limits of everything he believed himself to be. Mrs. Kim's entrance was not a mere detail. It was the first tremor after the eruption. Her eyes, which normally carried the cold calm of one who manages a domestic empire, now danced with contained unease. The look she cast at Jinwoo was one of respect, yes, but also of deep apprehension, as if witnessing a man signing his own fate. For Minji, the housekeeper's gaze was a mirror of her own fears, a silent warning that the walls of that mansion had ears, and that Jinwoo's rebellion was already the main topic behind the scenes. The war indeed had begun, and Minji suddenly felt herself at the center of a battlefield that was not hers. Jinwoo, however, did not look away. He had made his choice, and the weight of that decision, though immense, came with a strange and powerful sense of freedom. The image of Ha-eun laughing, the melody of that dance, had etched itself into his soul like an oath. He would not turn back. The chaebol world was a nest of vipers, and he knew his mother would use every weapon at her disposal. Gossip, pressure on the board, manipulation of shareholders, perhaps even the old tactic of arranging a suitable partner for him. A marriage of convenience that would seal Ha-eun's fate in a predetermined mold. But for the first time, the threat didn't seem so suffocating. There was something stronger, something he had defended tooth and nail, and that now propelled him. He observed Minji, still tense, but with a new spark in her eyes. She was a silent force, a rock amidst the storm. The way she protected Ji-hoon, the dignity in her posture, all of it resonated with the very essence he was rediscovering in himself. Her honesty was a balm in a world of masks, and the fragility she tried to hide was, paradoxically, her greatest strength. She had nothing to lose but her dignity and her son, and for that she was willing to fight. "Mrs. Kim," Jinwoo said, his voice cutting through the charged silence. He didn't raise his tone, but the authority in his words was undeniable. "Please, prepare a snack for the children and make sure they are not disturbed." Mrs. Kim blinked, the surprise in her eyes almost imperceptible. A snack for the children to play after everything? It was an order that defied the established hierarchy, a public declaration that Jinwoo's will would prevail, at least at that moment. She made an almost imperceptible bow, but her gaze at Minji was more prolonged, a mix of sympathy and a veiled warning about the approaching storm. The housekeeper knew that this order wasn't just about snacks. It was about the recognition of Ji-hoon within that house, and that was a direct affront to Mrs. Lee. Minji felt her blood run cold and then warm in her veins. Jinwoo's request was a validation, a protection, but also an exposure. She was no longer the invisible cleaner. Now she was the mother of the boy the CEO had defended, the woman for whom he had defied his own mother. Fear mingled with a wave of gratitude and overwhelming responsibility. She hadn't asked for this, but now she was intrinsically linked to that man and his battle. The children, oblivious to the complexity of the adult world, continued their improvised dance, their laughter echoing in the vast room. Ha-eun twirled, arms outstretched, and Ji-hoon followed her, his movements a little more restrained, but the smile on his face was pure and radiant. They were the fragile bridge, the melody that had cracked the ice. Jinwoo took another step towards Minji, closing the distance between them. Their eyes met again, and this time there wasn't just a silent question but a shared determination. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he knew he wasn't alone. And Minji, in turn, felt an unexpected strength bloom in her chest. She was just a cleaner, yes, but she was also a mother, and her son's happiness was her own melody, one she would defend with the same ferocity Jin Woo showed for his. Mrs. Kim withdrew as silently as she had entered, but the air in the room felt denser, charged with a latent energy. Jin Woo knew his mother wouldn't remain silent for long. The gears of his world were already turning, and retaliation would come, relentless and calculated. But looking at Minji, at the silent strength she radiated, and at their children dancing, he felt a clarity that the ice in his heart had never allowed. The journey would be dangerous, full of dissonances and challenges. But for the first time, he was ready to face the storm. With the unexpected melody as his guide, what had been broken now began to rebuild, note by note, at a new and uncertain rhythm. The door closed behind Mrs. Kim, but the silence that followed was not one of peace, but of a tense calm, like the eye of a hurricane. Jin Woo felt the weight of the gears turning, not just in his mind, but in the very structure of that house, that empire. His mother, Mrs. Lee, was not a woman who accepted challenges. Her authority was absolute, her control unshakable. And he, her own son, had just torn the fabric of her meticulous order in public in front of the housekeeper. He could almost hear the buzzing of telephones, the whispered voices in the corridors, the gossip spreading like a virus. The CEO defended the cleaner and her son. The phrase in itself was an affront, a stain on the impeccable reputation his family had built over generations. The chaebol world was a stage where every move was calculated, every relationship a transaction. And he had, suddenly, thrown away the script, driven by a childish melody and genuine laughter. Minji, beside him, seemed like a statue, her eyes fixed on the children, but her mind, he knew, was in turmoil. The gratitude in her gaze was palpable, but the fear was even more vivid. She understood the implications. She knew what it meant to be Mrs. Lee's target. Her life, already precarious, now hung by an even finer thread. He felt a pang of guilt for dragging her into his own battle, but the sight of Ha-Eun, so happy, so free, dispelled any regret. His daughter's happiness was worth any war. "Min-ji-si," he said, his voice low but firm. "You don't need to worry." It was an empty promise, he knew. She did need to worry, but he wanted her to know she wasn't alone, that he, the cold and distant CEO, was there by her side, however unlikely it seemed. She finally tore her gaze from the children and met his. Her eyes, large and expressive, carried a mix of disbelief and a strength he was beginning to admire. "Sir," she began, her voice a little choked, I don't know how to thank you, but Mrs. Lee..." He raised his hand, gently interrupting her. "My mother is predictable," he said, a touch of bitterness in his voice. "She'll do what she always does. But I won't let it affect Ha-Eun or Ji-hoon." The last part was said with a determination that surprised them both. He was, in fact, committing to protect the cleaner's son. As the children danced, the melody of a cartoon now filling the air, Jin Woo felt his cell phone vibrate in his pocket. He didn't need to look to know who it was. His mother, the first salvo of the war. He ignored it. Not now. Not in front of Minji, not while Ha-Eun was laughing. He needed a moment to steady himself, to solidify his strategy. Minji observed the gesture, the refusal to answer the call. A wave of shock ran through her. He was openly defying her. What did this mean for her, for Ji-hoon? She felt the weight of responsibility, but also a strange sense of empowerment. She was no longer invisible. She was part of something bigger, something dangerous, but which also promised a dignity she never dared to dream of. Suddenly, the living room door opened again, this time with more force. It wasn't Mrs. Kim, it was Mrs. Lee herself, her imposing figure filling the doorway, her eyes flashing with a contained fury that was almost more frightening than a scream. She didn't need gossip to know what was happening. She had come to see with her own eyes. Her gaze swept the room, fixing first on the children, who stopped dancing, sensing the abrupt change in atmosphere. Ha-Yun, who had been laughing, now recoiled slightly behind Ji-hoon, who in turn instinctively stepped forward, like a small protector. The scene for Mrs. Lee must have been the confirmation of her worst nightmare. Her eyes then moved to Jin-woo, and then, with glacial intensity, to Min-ji. The air in the room grew even denser, almost unbreathable. Mrs. Lee didn't say a word, but her presence was a silent thunder, a warning that the storm had arrived. Jin-woo took a step forward, interposing himself slightly between his mother and Min-ji. It was a subtle gesture, but laden with meaning, a declaration. "Mother," he said, his voice calm, but with a firmness she rarely heard. "The children are playing." Mrs. Lee finally spoke, her voice low but sharp as an ice blade. "Playing," she repeated, the word laden with contempt. Her gaze at Min-ji was one of pure disapproval. "Min-ji-si, don't you have work to do? Or do you think this is a daycare?" Min-ji felt her face burn. The humiliation was public, direct. She wanted to shrink, to disappear. But then she felt Jin-woo's gaze on her back, a silent force that prevented her from yielding. And little Ji-hoon, still in front of Ha-eun, looked at Mrs. Lee with a challenging innocence that broke Min-ji's heart. "Mother, please," Jin-woo intervened, his voice now more tense. "I gave Min-ji-si permission for Ji-hoon to play with Ha-eun. It's good for her." Mrs. Lee laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Good for her?" she scoffed, her eyes fixed on Jin-woo. "Since when does the CEO's daughter need the company of the cleaner? You're losing your mind, Jin-woo. Or perhaps you're losing control of your own house." The attack wasn't just about the children or Min-ji. It was about Jin-woo's control, about his authority. It was a calculated move to undermine his decision, to remind him of his place. But Jin-woo didn't back down. "No, mother," he replied, his voice now a thread of steel. "I'm just ensuring my daughter's happiness, and if that means she needs friends, then so be it." He looked at Min-ji, a brief but significant eye contact. "Min-ji-si, please take the children to the garden. Mrs. Kim should already be preparing the snacks." It was an order, not a request. And it was an order that directly defied Mrs. Lee. Min-ji felt a shiver. She couldn't disobey the CEO, but disobeying Mrs. Lee was signing her own professional death sentence. But the way Jin-woo looked at her, the protection in his eyes, made her make a decision. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice surprisingly firm. She took Ji-hoon's hand, who promptly took Ha-eun's. The children, still a little scared, followed Min-ji out of the room, leaving Jin-woo and his mother alone on the battlefield. The door closed again, but this time the silence was deafening. Mrs. Lee and Jin-woo stared at each other, the tension so dense it could almost be touched. The war had been declared, not with shouts but with glances, with silent orders, and with the unexpected courage of a man who had found a new melody for his life. The ice had cracked, and the storm now was upon them. What would come next? No one could predict. But one thing was certain. The music had changed forever. The silence that followed the closed door was more deafening than any scream. A dense vacuum filled the vast room, charged with the electricity of an impending storm. Jin-woo and his mother, Mrs. Lee, were alone, separated by only a few feet, but by an abyss of expectations and wills. Their eyes met, and in Mrs. Lee's gaze, Jin-woo saw not just fury, but a deep, almost palpable disappointment that struck him like a cold blow. "Jin-woo," she began, her voice low, but each syllable was a sharp blade. There was no explicit anger, just a calculated calm that was infinitely more terrifying. "Have you lost your mind? Or perhaps grief has finally made you forget who you are and who we are?" The mention of his grief, of his deceased wife, was an old tactic, a wound she knew how to reopen. It was a subtle reminder of his vulnerability, of his supposed weakness. But Jinwoo didn't flinch. The ice in his heart had begun to melt, and with it, a new strength had bloomed. "Mother," he replied, his voice firm, without wavering, "I know exactly who I am, and I know what's best for my daughter." Mrs. Lee took a step forward, closing the distance between them. Her eyes, previously only disappointed, now gleamed with icy intensity. "Better for your daughter?" she scoffed, the word dripping from her lips with disdain. "Since when does the daughter of the CEO of one of the country's largest conglomerates need to mingle with the offspring of servitude? This is an affront to our position, Jinwoo, a stain on the family name." He felt the pressure, the overwhelming force of his mother, who had always dictated every aspect of his life. The melody of his childhood had been a rigid score, with no room for improvisation. But the melody he had heard today, the laughter of Ha-un and Ji-hoon, was a different song, one he was not willing to silence. "Ha-un is a child, Mother," Jinwoo argued, his voice gaining a defensive tone. "She needs friends, Joy. She needs a childhood that isn't just surrounded by tutors and rules. She needs a life." Mrs. Lee laughed again, a dry, humorless sound that echoed in the room. "Life? You call this life? You're allowing a maid and her son to manipulate your daughter, and by extension you. You're being naive, Jinwoo. You're being weak." The word weak struck him. It was the accusation he feared most, the one his mother used to control him since his father died. But for the first time, he didn't feel the sting. Weakness, he realized, wasn't seeking his daughter's happiness, but rather living in a gilded cage, isolated from everything genuine. "No, Mother," he retorted, his voice now a thread of steel. "I am being a father, and I am protecting my daughter from becoming as cold as us." Mrs. Lee paled. The accusation coming from her own son was a shock. She was accustomed to being the unshakable force, the matriarch who could not be questioned. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice laden with a contained fury that threatened to explode. "I sacrificed everything for this family, for you, for your position, and you repay me with this insolence because of a cleaner." "It's not because of her, Mother," Jinwoo corrected, his voice calmer now, but his determination unshakable. "It's for Ha-un, and yes, it's also for me. I will no longer allow my daughter's happiness to be sacrificed in the name of reputation or position. I will not allow her to grow up without the ability to laugh, to connect, to feel." He took a step forward, evening the distance between them. His eyes, once so empty, now burned with a conviction Mrs. Lee had never seen. "I know what you'll do, Mother. You'll try to fire Minji-si. You'll try to drive them away. You'll try to control me. But I won't allow it. Minji-si and Ji-hoon will stay, and Ha-un will have the childhood she deserves." Mrs. Lee stared at him, her lips pressed into a thin line. She could see the change in his eyes. The crack in the ice she thought was unbreakable. The melody had truly changed, and that, she knew, was a greater threat than any scandal. "You are digging your own grave, Jinwoo," she finally said, her voice returning to an icy whisper, "and dragging others with you. Think carefully about the consequences of your actions, not just for you, but for the company, for your legacy. And for this woman and her son. Do you think you can protect them from the world you defy? You don't know what it takes to keep this empire standing." With that warning, she turned abruptly, her imposing figure disappearing through the door as silently as she had arrived. But the impact of his words remained, echoing in the empty room. Jinwoo stood there, alone, feeling the tremor of the battle he had just fought. The air felt lighter, but also more dangerous. He knew his mother wasn't bluffing. The gears of his world were now spinning at high speed, and retaliation would come, relentless and calculated. The war had been declared, and he was the general of a one-man army, with a cleaner and two innocent children as his unexpected allies. He closed his eyes, the image of Ha-un and Ji-hoon dancing filling his mind. The melody. It was for her that he fought. It was for her that he was willing to face the storm, no matter how fierce it became. The ice had cracked, and he could no longer turn back. The journey would be dangerous, full of dissonances and challenges, but for the first time in a long time, he felt he was on the right path. The music had changed forever, and he was ready to dance to its new rhythm, even if it meant defying the whole world. The silence that followed Mrs. Lee's departure was not a relief, but a heavy vacuum, filled with the reverberation of unspoken words and veiled threats. Jinwoo remained motionless in the center of the vast room, the echo of his mother's voice still resonating in his ears, each syllable a reminder of the abyss he had just opened. The air, previously dense with tension, now felt rarefied, but charged with a dangerous electricity, the promise of a storm he himself had invoked. His eyes swept the room, the luxurious furniture, the priceless works of art. Everything seemed to bear witness to his insolence. This was his family's empire, the legacy his mother had defended tooth and nail, and he, the heir, had just challenged its foundations for a melody, for a child's laughter. Her warning, "You are digging your own grave, Jinwoo," was not just a threat, but a prophecy he knew she would do everything to fulfill. But strangely, there was no regret. There was fear, yes, a chill down his spine at the thought of his mother's relentless power, but also a newfound clarity. The ice in his heart had cracked, and through that fissure a faint light had entered, revealing a path he didn't know existed, a path of fatherhood, of humanity, of life. He walked slowly to the window, his eyes fixed on the garden. There, under the soft afternoon sun, Minji sat on a stone bench, watching Ha-un and Ji-hoon. The children, oblivious to the storm brewing inside the house, ran across the grass, their clear, unhindered laughter reaching him even through the glass. Ji-hoon was showing Ha-un how to jump over a small flower bed, and Ha-un, with a smile he hadn't seen on her face in years, tried to imitate him, clumsy but happy. Minji, in turn, seemed like a statue. Her shoulders were tense, her head bowed, but her eyes followed every movement of the children with an almost protective vigilance. He could imagine the weight on her shoulders, the humiliation she had endured, the uncertainty that now hung over her life and her son's. He had placed her in an impossible position between loyalty to her employer and the wrath of the matriarch. And yet, she remained, performing her task, protecting the children. A pang of guilt struck him, but was quickly replaced by an iron determination. He had promised, he had declared that Minji and Ji-hoon would stay, and he would do everything to keep that promise. It wasn't just for Ha-un, but also for himself. For years, he had lived under the yoke of expectation, of reputation, of the impeccable image his mother had carved for him. But that image was cold, empty, and there was no room for the melody that now filled his house. He turned from the window, his mind already working. Mrs. Lee wouldn't attack directly, not obviously. She was subtle, calculating. She would use the gears of the empire, the rules, the contracts, social pressure. She would try to isolate him, undermine his authority, and finally remove the threat that Minji and Ji-hoon represented to the order she had established. Jinwoo knew he needed to anticipate. He needed to protect Minji and Ji-hoon, not just from his mother, but from the relentless world he had defied. What did that mean? Give Minji a more secure contract? Offer her a status that would make her less vulnerable? Or perhaps something more fundamental? He needed to understand what she needed, what she feared. He walked to his desk, a space that was once synonymous with power and control, but which now seemed like a command post in a personal war. He turned on his computer, but not to check emails or financial reports. Instead, he began to research labor laws, employee rights, protection precedents. He, the CEO of a conglomerate, was looking for ways to protect his cleaner and her son from his own mother. The irony was not lost on him. The melody of the children's laughter in the garden seemed more distant now, but its resonance in his heart was stronger than ever. He was entering unknown territory, a battlefield where the weapons were not money or influence, but feelings, loyalty, and the fragile hope of a happier life. He didn't know what the future would bring. Mrs. Lee was a formidable adversary, and he was aware that he was underestimating her. But for the first time in a long time, Jin Woo felt he was fighting for something that truly mattered. Not for profit, not for power, but for his daughter's happiness, and perhaps for his own redemption. The ice had cracked, and he was ready to face the storm, to dance to the new rhythm, even if it meant dismantling the world he knew. The music had changed forever, and he was determined to be the conductor of his new symphony. The days that followed were a tense dance between apparent normality and silent war. Jin Woo immersed himself in his work with renewed intensity, but now with a different purpose. His meetings were more focused, his decisions quicker, but his mind was constantly weaving strategies for the approaching battle. He had instructed his personal lawyer, Dr. Kim, to review Minji's contract, seeking loopholes to strengthen her position, to make her less dispensable. "I want her to have the greatest possible security, Dr. Kim. And I want this to be done discreetly, without raising suspicion." Dr. Kim, a man of few words but great perceptiveness, merely nodded, his narrowed eyes revealing that he understood the unspoken implications. Meanwhile, Mrs. Lee remained silent, a silence more menacing than any scream. She didn't call, didn't send messages, but Jin Woo felt her presence like a cold shadow hovering over the house. He knew she was watching, calculating, waiting for the right moment to strike. He imagined she had already mobilized her own resources, her contacts, her spies within the company itself and elite society. At night, after Ha-Yun and Ji-Hoon were asleep and Minji had returned to her small staff room, Jin Woo allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. He observed the house, once a sanctuary of order and silence, now filled with the echoes of children's laughter, the promise of a life. He wondered if he was being reckless, if he was condemning everyone to an uncertain fate. But then, the image of Ha-Eun dancing with Ji-Hoon, the pure joy on her face, returned to his mind, and the doubt dissipated. The melody. It was for her that he was fighting. It was the melody he never knew he needed. And now, he couldn't live without it. He knew Mrs. Lee didn't care for melodies. She cared for the symphony of power, reputation, control. And he had dared to defy the conductor. The tension increased daily. Every unanswered phone call, every furtive glance from an employee, every piece of news about a subtle move on the company's board. The ice had cracked, but the storm was yet to come. And he was there, in the eye of the hurricane, ready to protect the fragile melody he had found. Mrs. Lee's silence was a sharper weapon than any scream. It was the silence that precedes the storm, the calm that hides the treacherous current. Jin Woo felt it in every fiber of his being, an invisible pressure that seeped through the walls of his mansion, through the corridors of his company, even into the forced smiles of his subordinates. He knew the attack would come, but the uncertainty of its form and timing was the true torment. The first signs were subtle, almost imperceptible to a less attentive observer. A crucial project, which should have been approved without problems, now encountered unexpected obstacles on the board. Documents that should have been on his desk were mysteriously delayed. His directors, once efficient and direct, began to hesitate, to avert their gaze, to speak in half words. It was as if a cold mist had spread through the company, obscuring clarity and confidence. Jin Woo, the CEO who once commanded with unquestionable authority, felt the gears of his own empire seize under his mother's silent influence. He observed, analyzed. Every delay, every hesitation, every whisper was a thread in the web Mrs. Lee was weaving. She didn't attack him directly, didn't confront him. Instead, she undermined his base, questioned his competence, created an environment of instability that would eventually force him to yield. The irony was cruel. She was using the same tools he had mastered, power, influence, control, to dismantle his own life. At home, the atmosphere was equally tense, though in a different way. Minji, always discreet, now seemed even more withdrawn. Her eyes, once filled with a resigned quietude, now carried a glimmer of concern. She moved through the house with an almost ghostly efficiency, as if fearing that any sound could attract the wrath that hung in the air. Jinwoo observed her, noticing the invisible weight she carried. He had put her in this position, and guilt gnawed at him, but also fueled his determination. One evening during dinner, Ha-Eun, oblivious to the silent war, asked, "Appa, isn't Grandma coming to visit us anymore?" His daughter's question was like a stab to Jinwoo's heart. He felt Minji's gaze on him, a look that wasn't judgmental but understanding. He forced a smile. "Grandma is very busy, dear, but she always thinks of you." It was a lie, and its bitter taste lingered in his mouth. The escalation came in the form of a gossip article in an online celebrity magazine, disguised as social observation. The article, without mentioning names, spoke of the moral decay of certain elite families, insinuating that certain widowed CEOs were negligently their social and family responsibilities in favor of improper relationships with lower status employees, citing the well-being of innocent children as a pretext for questionable behaviors. The description was vague enough to avoid a lawsuit, but specific enough for anyone in Jin Woo's circle to know who it referred to. Jin Woo's fury was a fire that threatened to consume everything. His mother was not only attacking him, but also Minji and, by extension, Ha-Eun and Ji-Hoon. She was using the dirtiest weapon of all, public defamation and social shame. He knew this was just the beginning. The article was a test, a provocation to see how far he would go. He immediately summoned Dr. Kim. "I want you to investigate the origin of this article. I want to know who planted it. And I want you to prepare a strong legal statement against defamation, ready to be used." Dr. Kim, reading the article with a grave expression, nodded. "Sir, this is a classic tactic. They want to tarnish your reputation and the company's, and more importantly, they want to isolate Mrs. Minji." "I know," Jinwoo replied, his voice low but laden with a cold intensity. "They will not succeed." He knew his mother was betting that he, the cold and calculating CEO, would not withstand the social pressure and the threat to his reputation. She expected him to protect his empire, to sacrifice Minji and Ji-Hoon, but she underestimated the crack in the ice, the melody that had seeped into his heart. That night, after the children were asleep, Jinwoo found Minji in the kitchen, cleaning the countertops with methodical slowness. He knew she had seen the article. The silence between them was heavy, filled with the unspoken words of shame and guilt. "Minji-see," he began, his voice a little hoarse, "I'm so sorry about this. My mother, she's going too far." Minji stopped cleaning but didn't turn around. Her shoulders were tense. "Sir," she said, her voice almost a whisper, perhaps Ji-Hoon and I should leave. For everyone's sake, for Miss Ha-Eun's sake." Jinwoo's heart tightened. This was exactly what his mother wanted, for Minji to feel guilty, for her to sacrifice herself. But he wouldn't allow it. He walked up to her, stopping at a respectful distance. "No, You're not going anywhere. I promised, and I will keep my promise. This isn't your fault, it's mine, and I will fix this." Minji finally turned, her eyes teary, but with a strength that surprised him. "Sir, Mrs. Lee, she is very powerful. She can destroy everything." "She can try," Jinwoo replied, his voice firm, "but she won't. Not while I'm here. I won't let her take the melody from this house again." Those words, spoken aloud, sealed his fate. He wasn't just defending Minji and Jihoon, he was defending himself, the new life he had found. The war had officially begun, and Jinwoo, the cold CEO, was ready to fight. Not with the coldness of logic, but with the warmth of a heart that finally had learned to feel. He knew his mother's next move would be even crueler, more direct. But he also knew he was no longer alone. The melody, fragile and precious, was his banner, and he would defend it to the end. The calm before the storm had ended. Mrs. Lee's silence, once a weapon of waiting, transformed into a distant but audible thunder that echoed through the corridors of Jinwoo's life. He knew she wouldn't back down. His mother was a ruthless strategist, and family honor, as she saw it, was a battlefield where there was no room for mercy. The first wave came unexpectedly, but brutally. It wasn't a new article, nor a boycott by advisors. It was a formal letter delivered by an impeccably dressed messenger directly to Minji. An offer of relocation and promotion to a company branch in a distant city with a substantial salary increase, but on the condition that she move immediately, leaving behind the mansion and, implicitly, Ha-eun and Jihoon. It was an offer that seemed generous on the surface, but was in fact an exile, an attempt to tear Minji from Jinwoo's life in an honorable way. Minji brought the letter to Jinwoo, her eyes fixed on the paper, her expression a mixture of shock and resignation. He read the words, each one a cold stab. "For your good and the good of your family," the letter read. "We believe this opportunity would be beneficial for your professional and personal development." It was cruel manipulation disguised as benevolence. Jinwoo's anger boiled, more intense than any corporate fury he had ever felt. His mother wasn't just attacking his reputation, she was trying to dismember the fabric of his new family, of his new melody. He tore the letter into pieces, the violence of the gesture echoing in his ears. "This won't happen," he declared, his voice low and dangerous. "You're not going anywhere." Minji, however, seemed more downcast than relieved. "Sir, perhaps it's for the best, to avoid more trouble, to protect Miss Ha-eun." He turned to her, holding her shoulders with a firmness that surprised her. "No. Protecting Ha-eun means protecting her from people who want to rip her joy away. And you and Jihoon are part of that joy. My mother is wrong, and I won't let her win." In that moment, Jinwoo was not the cold, calculating CEO. He was a father, a man who had finally found something to fight for with every fiber of his being. He instructed Dr. Kim to formally refuse the offer, citing contractual clauses and Minji's lack of consent. But he knew this was just a formality. The war was becoming personal. His mother's response was not long in coming. Instead of a counteroffer, she called an emergency board meeting, citing urgent concerns about leadership stability and the corporation's public image. It was a direct blow, an attempt to use Jinwoo's own empire against him. She planned to question his ability to lead, insinuating that his personal life was affecting his professional decisions. The tension in the mansion was palpable. Ha-eun, sensitive to changes in the atmosphere, began to ask why Grandma didn't call, why her father seemed so serious. Jihoon, though more reserved, observed Jinwoo and Minji with keen eyes, sensing the gravity of the situation. Minji, in turn, tried to maintain a facade of normalcy for the children, but Jinwoo saw the concern in her eyes, the way she recoiled slightly with each phone ring. One evening, Jinwoo found Minji in the garden, sitting on a bench, looking at the stars. He sat beside her, the silence between them more comfortable than ever. "Are you scared?" he asked, his voice soft. She sighed, a fragile sound in the night air. "Yes, sir. I'm afraid of what she can do. I'm afraid for Ji-hoon, and for Ha-eun, and for you." "Me too," he admitted, a confession that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. "But I won't back down. Not this time." He looked at her, the starlight reflected in her eyes. "I need you, Minji-si, not as an employee, but as someone who reminds me what's important, someone who helps me protect this melody." Minji looked at him, and for the first time, Jinwoo saw not just concern, but a spark of determination in her eyes. "I will do whatever it takes, sir, to protect the children and to protect the melody." This exchange of words, a silent pact under the starry sky, solidified the alliance between them. Jinwoo knew he wasn't just fighting against his mother, he was fighting for a future, for a new definition of family. On the day of the board meeting, Jinwoo entered the room with a cold calm, but with a burning fire in his chest. His mother was there, seated at the head of the table, her eagle eyes fixed on him. She had mobilized her allies, and the atmosphere was charged with expectation. The battle for control of his company, and, more importantly, of his life, was about to begin. He knew she would try to discredit him, paint him as a man who had lost his way, who was putting the company at risk for inappropriate personal interests. But he was ready. He had a plan that would not only defend his position, but also expose the cruelty behind his mother's actions. He was ready to dismantle the world she had built for him, if it meant protecting the melody he had found. The war had become a symphony, and he was ready to conduct every note, however dissonant it might be. The boardroom was a modern coliseum, where loyalty was bought and sold, and power was the only currency. Jinwoo entered, feeling the weight of every gaze, the silent expectation that hung in the dense air. His mother, Mrs. Lee, sat at the head of the table, a sphinx of silk and steel, her eyes piercing him with calculated coldness. Beside her, the board members, some long-time allies, others mere observers, awaited the spectacle. "Gentlemen," Mrs. Lee's voice echoed, sharp and precise, "we have convened this extraordinary meeting due to urgent concerns affecting the stability and image of our esteemed corporation. Our CEO, Mr. Jinwoo, has demonstrated erratic behavior, which raises serious questions about his leadership capabilities." She began her offensive, not with direct accusations, but with venomous insinuations. She cited Jinwoo's distraction, the prioritization of personal matters over company interests, the neglect of crucial duties, all veiled enough to avoid easy refutation, yet clear enough to paint a picture of a declining leader. She presented manipulated financial reports to suggest a slowdown, indirectly attributing it to his lack of focus. It was a masterful performance of corporate defamation. Jinwoo listened, his expression impassive, but inside, fire burned. He knew she was trying to dismantle him piece by piece, using the tools he himself had perfected. But he was no longer the man she had created. The melody had changed his score. When it was his turn to speak, he stood, his posture erect, his voice calm and controlled, but with an authority that silenced the room. "Mrs. Lee, members of the board," he began, his eyes sweeping the room, "I appreciate the concern for the company's stability. Allow me, however, to present a different perspective." He didn't deny the accusations directly. Instead, he turned the tables. "It is true that my personal life has undergone a significant transformation. And yes, this transformation has made me reevaluate my priorities. But contrary to what has been insinuated, this has not weakened me. On the contrary, it has strengthened me." He projected recent performance charts, showing unexpected growth in sectors he had revitalized, innovative projects he had driven. My distraction, as it was called, allowed me to see the company not just as a set of numbers, but as a living entity, with people, with potential. And yes, this includes the well-being of all our employees and the image we project to the world. Then he dropped his bomb. Mrs. Lee mentioned the company's image, and I agree that it is crucial. But what happens when leadership itself, in pursuit of personal interests, tries to destabilize the CEO? What happens when defamation tactics are used, not just against me, but against innocent people, against children? A murmur ran through the room. Mrs. Lee stiffened, her eyes glinting dangerously. "I have evidence," Jinwoo continued, his voice gaining strength, "of attempts to manipulate the media to create defamatory articles, of offers of forced relocation for loyal employees, and of an orchestrated campaign to undermine confidence in leadership. Such actions, Mrs. Lee, not only harm my reputation, but more importantly, the reputation of the company you claim to protect. They create an environment of fear and distrust. They are, in themselves, the greatest threat to the stability we face." He didn't directly accuse her of corruption, but of internal sabotage, of using company power for personal and vengeful ends. He had Dr. Kim prepared to leak information about the origin of the articles and the nature of the promotion offer if the vote went against him. It was a risky bluff, but he knew his mother hated public scandals that could tarnish the family and company name. The room fell silent. The board members, who had previously seemed inclined to support Mrs. Lee, now exchanged nervous glances. They understood the implications. Mrs. Lee had underestimated Jinwoo. She thought he would buckle under pressure, but he had become a fiercer fighter, motivated by something deeper than power. The vote was tense. Some abstained, others voted for Jinwoo, reluctantly. In the end, by a narrow margin, the motion to question his leadership was rejected. Jinwoo retained his position. Mrs. Lee looked at him, not with anger, but with a cold, contained fury that was far more frightening. She had lost the battle, but not the war. Her lips moved in an inaudible whisper, but Jinwoo read the message in her eyes. This isn't over. He knew it was true. The victory was merely a postponement. The melody had been defended for a day, but the orchestra of his mother's revenge still had many notes to play. Back at the mansion, Minji waited, anxiety evident in every gesture. "Sir? How did it go?" Jinwoo merely nodded, a deep weariness in his shoulders. "For now, we are safe." He didn't want to scare her with the intensity of the lingering threat, but she won't give up. That night, Hyun, sensing the tension, snuggled closer to Jinwoo. "Daddy, is Grandma mad at you?" He hugged her tightly. "Grandma's just a little confused, my love, but Daddy will protect you, and Ji-hoon, and Minji-si." He looked at Minji, who was sitting on the floor, playing with Ji-hoon. Their eyes met, and a silent understanding passed between them. The struggle had become more public, more dangerous, but it had also solidified what they had. Mrs. Lee's next move came faster than Jinwoo expected, and it was the most personal and cruel of all. It wasn't an article, nor a meeting. It was a court order, a petition for Ha-eun's custody, alleging that Jinwoo was a negligent, emotionally unstable father, and that her current environment with inappropriate influences was detrimental to the child's well-being. She was using Jinwoo's own daughter as a weapon, trying to tear the melody directly from his heart. The war had become a battle for the family's soul, and Jinwoo knew this was the fight he couldn't afford to lose. The melody Jinwoo had found, the newfound harmony in his life, was now under direct attack. The court order, delivered by a messenger with the coldness of an executioner, was a calculated, precise, and brutal blow. Every word of that document was a stab. Negligent father, emotionally unstable, detrimental environment, inappropriate influences. The irony was cruel. His mother, who had never been a maternal figure, now claimed the role of protector, using the law as a weapon to dismantle the only thing Jinwoo had built for himself. He read and reread, anger boiling in his veins, but beneath it, a chilling fear. Not for himself, but for Ha-eun, for Ji-hoon, for Min-ji. His mother wasn't just trying to remove him from power. She was trying to tear the soul from his home, from his life. Min-ji found him in the office, her face pale at the sight of the document in his hands. "Sir, what happened?" Her voice was an apprehensive whisper. Jinwoo couldn't hide the gravity of the situation. "My mother. She's seeking custody of Ha-eun." The air seemed to thin. Min-ji swayed slightly, her eyes wide with horror. "Custody? But why? Ha-eun is so happy here. She claims I'm an unfit father, that the environment here isn't good for Ha-eun. She's using you and Ji-hoon as part of the inappropriate influence." Jinwoo's voice was laden with contained fury. Min-ji brought her hands to her mouth, tears welling up. "No, it can't be. Ji-hoon, he would never harm anyone. And Ha-eun and he are such good friends." The fear for her son was palpable, a primal terror Jinwoo recognized. He approached, placing his hands on her shoulders. "No, you and Ji-hoon are part of this family now. If she wants a war, she'll have one. But it won't be a dirty war like hers. It will be a war for the truth, for Ha-eun's happiness, for the melody we've built." Their eyes met, and in that moment of shared despair, their alliance solidified even further. It was no longer just a silent pact under the stars. It was a fortress against a common enemy. "What will we do, sir?" Min-ji's voice trembled, but there was a new determination in her eyes. "I will do whatever it takes. If I have to leave, if that protects the children—" "No!" Jinwoo interrupted her, the word coming out with a force that surprised her. "We're not going anywhere. You and Ji-hoon are part of this family now. If she wants a war, she'll have one, but it won't be a dirty war like hers. It will be a war for the truth, for Ha-eun's happiness, for the melody we've built." He immediately contacted his lawyer, Dr. Park, a shrewd and loyal man who had handled Mrs. Lee's machinations in the past. The news of the custody petition shocked even the experienced lawyer. "Mr. Jinwoo, your mother is playing hardball. A custody battle is always delicate, and with her influence, it will be an immense challenge. We will need irrefutable proof of your capability as a father and the stability of the family environment." The mansion, once a refuge, became a silent battlefield. Ha-eun, sensing the change in atmosphere, asked why her father was always on the phone, why Min-ji seemed so worried. Ji-hoon, with his keen sensitivity, observed everything, his large, dark eyes absorbing the tension. Jinwoo and Min-ji strove to maintain normalcy, but the shadow of threat hung over them. Jinwoo spent hours with Ha-eun, reading, playing, teaching her to play a few notes on the piano. He hugged her tighter, kissed her forehead with a tenderness he had never shown before. He wanted her to know, deep in her little heart, how loved and safe she was. Min-ji, in turn, dedicated herself to creating an environment of joy and stability for the children. She cooked Ha-eun's favorite foods, organized games in the garden, and ensured Ji-hoon was always nearby for playtime. She knew that every laugh, every moment of happiness was evidence against Mrs. Lee's accusations. "We need witnesses," Dr. Park instructed, "people who can attest to your character, Ha-eun's happiness, the good coexistence with Min-ji and Ji-hoon, teachers, doctors, even household staff, who can speak about the environment." Jinwoo thought of Dr. Kim, Ha-eun's doctor, who could attest to her health and well-being. He thought of Ha-eun's teachers, who always praised her joy and development, and he thought of the mansion's staff, who had witnessed the transformation of his home. Mrs. Lee didn't stand still. She sent disguised social visitors to the mansion, trying to find flaws, to record moments that could be distorted. Jinwoo and Minji were always on alert, aware that every step, every word could be used against them. One night, Jinwoo found Minji in Ha-eun's room, watching the girl sleep. "She's so innocent," Minji whispered, her voice choked. "I can't let them take her from you. I can't let them take Ji-hoon from me." Jinwoo hugged her, a comforting gesture that had become natural between them. "We won't let them. I promise to protect this melody, and I will keep my promise." He looked at Ha-eun's sleeping face, then at Minji. "You are the reason I am fighting so hard, Minji-si. You showed me what is truly important. You and Ji-hoon are part of Ha-eun's happiness and part of mine. I won't let anyone destroy that." The legal battle was approaching. The date of the first hearing was set. Jinwoo knew it would be a brutal fight, where every aspect of his life would be scrutinized, every decision questioned. But he was ready. He wasn't just defending his daughter, he was defending his right to love, to build a family on his own terms, to finally live the melody he had found. The war had become a battle for the very definition of his future, and he was determined to win, no matter the cost. The days that followed the delivery of the court order were a blur of anxiety and preparation. The mansion, once a sanctuary, transformed into a defense headquarters. Every laugh from Ha-eun and Ji-hoon was a weapon, every moment of affection, a piece of evidence. Jinwoo felt the weight of the world on his shoulders, but the image of Minji, with her silent determination, and the innocent faces of the children, were his fuel. The melody he had found was under attack, and he would not allow it to be silenced. Dr. Park, the lawyer, was a rock of pragmatism. "Mr. Jinwoo, we need an arsenal of evidence, photos, videos, testimonies, everything that shows Ha-eun's happiness, your dedication as a father, and the absence of any inappropriate influence." He spoke with the coldness necessary for the approaching battle, but Jinwoo saw the concern in his eyes. Minji, in turn, became the guardian of normalcy. She strove to keep a smile on her face so that Ha-eun and Ji-hoon wouldn't feel the brewing storm. But Jinwoo saw the deep, dark circles under her eyes, the way she held Ji-hoon closer, how her eyes fixed on Ha-eun with protective tenderness. She was fighting her own silent war, a war to protect her son and the little girl who had become part of her heart. "I can testify," she told Jinwoo one evening, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "I can tell the court how much Ha-eun is loved, how much she has blossomed here. I can say that Ji-hoon is a good boy, and that they are happy together." Jinwoo looked at her, gratitude and admiration flooding him. "It won't be easy, Minji-si. They will try to discredit you." She merely nodded, her eyes burning with newfound courage. "I know, but I will do whatever it takes." Mrs. Lee, true to her nature, didn't just wait. Her social visitors were increasingly frequent, disguised as social workers or educational consultants, but Jinwoo and Minji knew the truth. They were spies, looking for any slip, any moment of imperfection to use against them. The mansion seemed to have glass walls, and every move was calculated. Dr. Kim, Ha-eun's doctor, provided a detailed testimony about the girl's health and emotional well-being, attesting to her significant improvement since Minji and Ji-hoon entered their lives. Ha-eun's teachers, surprised by the petition, described a cheerful, sociable child with excellent performance, contradicting the image of a child in a detrimental environment. Even the mansion's oldest staff, who had witnessed Jinwoo's transformation and the house's atmosphere, offered to testify. The morning of the first hearing dawned grey and cold, mirroring Jinwoo's inner mood. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy, formal. Mrs. Lee sat in the front row, her expression impassive, a portrait of calculating coldness. Beside her, her lawyer, a man known for his ruthlessness in family cases, smiled with unsettling confidence. When the case was called, Mrs. Lee's lawyer began his attack. He painted a grim picture of Jin Woo, a workaholic CEO, emotionally distant, incapable of providing proper care for a child. He cited the death of Ha-Yun's mother, suggesting that Jin Woo had not overcome his grief in a healthy way, and that the girl was being raised in an environment of emotional instability. Then he turned his attention to Minji and Ji-hoon. And of course, there's the matter of inappropriate influences, he declared, his voice laden with disdain. The child, Ha-eun, has been exposed to a socially inferior environment, living daily with a cleaner's daughter and her son. A coexistence which, while seemingly harmless on the surface, is detrimental to the social development and identity of a child of her standing. Mrs. Lee is concerned that Ha-eun is being deprived of an environment suitable for her heritage and future. Jin Woo's blood boiled. "Objection, Your Honor!" Dr. Park intervened, but the damage was already done. The lawyer's words were a direct attack on Minji and Ji-hoon's dignity, an attempt to use social prejudice as a weapon. When it was Jin Woo's turn to testify, he rose, not as the cold CEO he once was, but as a father. He spoke of his pain, of his blindness, of how he had lost himself after his wife's death. "I admit, Your Honor, that for a time I failed as a father. I was lost, but then something changed." He looked at Minji, who was sitting in the gallery, her eyes meeting his. "Minji Si and Ji-hoon entered our lives not as inappropriate influences, but as a ray of sunshine. They brought laughter, warmth, and a melody I didn't know was missing. Ha-eun, who was once a quiet and withdrawn child, blossomed. She learned to laugh, to play, to share. Ji-hoon is her best friend, and Minji Si is a figure of affection and stability that Ha-eun never had." Jin Woo's voice, usually controlled, was choked with emotion. "My mother may see this as a flaw, as an inappropriate influence, but I see it as my daughter's salvation. I see it as the building of a family I chose, based on love and respect, not on status or prejudice. They are the melody I promised to protect." The courtroom fell silent. Mrs. Lee, for the first time, seemed slightly shaken, her mask of coldness cracking for an instant. The judge, a man of austere countenance, observed Jin Woo with an intensity that suggested he was evaluating more than just the words. After hours of testimonies and arguments, the judge finally delivered his provisional decision. The court recognizes the seriousness of the allegations, but also the passion and evidence presented by Mr. Jin Woo. There is insufficient evidence for an immediate transfer of custody. However, to ensure the well-being of the minor, Ha-eun, the court will order a more in-depth evaluation of the family environment by an independent team of child psychologists and social workers. They will make regular visits to Mr. Jin Woo's residence and submit a detailed report in 3 months. It wasn't a complete victory, but neither was it a defeat. It was a postponement, a chance. The melody was still under threat, but a pause had been granted. As he left the courtroom, Jin Woo met his mother's eyes. The icy fury had returned, and he knew the battle was far from over. But by his side, Minji was there, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and determination. The next phase of the war would be fought within the walls of his own home, under the scrutiny of unknown eyes. But Jin Woo knew he wasn't alone. They were a fortress, and the melody, though still fragile, would continue to be played. The judge's provisional decision hung over the mansion like a cloud, laden with uncertainty, but also with a strange hope. 3 months. 3 months under the scrutiny of unknown eyes, where every laugh, every hug, every meal would be evaluated, dissected. Jin Woo felt the weight of this responsibility, but looking at Minji, he saw not fear, but an unshakable determination that mirrored his own. They were a fortress, yes, but a fortress under siege. The child psychologists and social workers arrived with polished formality, their questions incisive, their gazes scrutinizing. They observed Ha-un and Ji-hoon playing, noted Minji's interaction with the children, the way Jin-woo knelt to talk with Ha-un, the patience with which he helped Ji-hoon assemble a puzzle. Every detail was noted, every silence interpreted. For the children, the presence of the visitors was, at first, a novelty. Ha-un, with her innocence, asked why so many people were coming to their house. Minji and Jin-woo explained that they were friends who wanted to make sure everyone was happy and safe. But the atmosphere was tense. Minji strove to maintain the routine, to ensure the home remained a sanctuary of normalcy. She cooked the children's favorite meals, read stories with funny voices, and even organized small tea parties to distract them. Jin-woo, in turn, readjusted his schedule, prioritizing being present, actively participating in the children's lives, not just as a father, but as a pillar of support for Minji. The evaluations were not easy. The social workers asked questions about Minji's upbringing, her family history, her ability to influence Ha-un. They questioned the unusual family structure, trying to find loopholes for Mrs. Lee's allegations. Minji responded with dignity, her voice calm but firm. She spoke of the love she felt for Ha-un, of the joy Ji-hoon found in their friendship, of how they were a family, not by blood ties, but by bonds of heart. Jin-woo witnessed Minji's strength, and his respect for her grew daily. He saw how she protected the children, how she defended her new life with a courage he never imagined. He, in turn, faced questions about his past as a workaholic CEO, about his ability to connect emotionally. He didn't shy away. He spoke of his transformation, of the pain that blinded him, and of the light that Minji and Ji-hoon brought. "They taught me to love again," he told one of the psychologists, his voice devoid of any corporate coldness. "They taught me what it means to be a real family." Mrs. Lee did not remain silent during these 3 months. Her own observers were seen near the mansion, and malicious rumors began to circulate in certain social circles, attempting to paint a negative picture of Jin-woo's situation. She tried, through intermediaries, to send expensive gifts to Ha-un, attempting to undermine the simplicity and happiness the girl found with Ji-hoon. But Jin-woo and Minji were vigilant, blocking all attempts at interference. There was one particularly difficult day. One of the psychologists, with an almost accusatory tone, asked Ha-un if she didn't miss playing with children of her own social class. Ha-un, with the innocence only a child can possess, looked at the woman and replied, "But Ji-hoon is my best friend. He taught me to dance. There's no one better to play with." The girl's simple and pure answer disarmed the psychologist and filled Jin-woo and Minji with silent pride. The melody they had cultivated was real, and the children were living proof of it. The 3 months felt like an eternity, but finally the report was concluded. The date of the final hearing approached. The tension was palpable, but there was also a sense of unity, that they had faced the storm together and emerged stronger. On the day of the final hearing, the courtroom was even more crowded than before. Mrs. Lee was present, her expression a mix of expectation and coldness. Her lawyer seemed confident, but Jin-woo felt a strange calm. He was no longer fighting for an image or for status. He was fighting for his family, for his melody. The judge began the hearing by calling the evaluation team. The chief psychologist, a woman with a serious demeanor, began to read the report. "Our observations over the past 3 months have revealed a surprisingly warm and stable family environment. The minor Ha-un demonstrates exceptional emotional and social development. She is cheerful, confident, and exhibits a strong emotional bond with her father, Mr. Jin-woo, and with Mrs. Minji and her son, Ji-hoon." She continued, The interaction between Ha-yoon and Ji-hoon is one of genuine and enriching friendship. They share activities, demonstrate mutual support, and exhibit a healthy and positive dynamic. Mrs. Min-ji has proven to be a caring and stable figure, contributing significantly to Ha-yoon's emotional well-being. Mr. Jin-woo, in turn, has demonstrated a profound transformation, actively dedicating himself to fatherhood and creating a loving and inclusive family environment. The report concluded, "We found no evidence of any inappropriate influence or detrimental environment. On the contrary, the presence of Mrs. Min-ji and Ji-hoon appears to have been fundamental to Ha-yoon's emotional recovery and to the building of a truly happy and functional home. We recommend that custody of the minor remain with Mr. Jin-woo and that the current family structure be maintained, as it is clearly beneficial for Ha-yoon's development." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Mrs. Lee was livid, her face contorted in a silent fury. Her lawyer tried to argue, to question the methodology, but the judge, after hearing the objections, delivered his final decision with unshakable clarity. Based on the evidence presented, including the detailed report from the independent evaluation team, the court determines that custody of the minor, Ha-yoon, will remain with Mr. Jin-woo. Allegations of an unsuitable environment and detrimental influence have been conclusively refuted. The court recognizes and validates the family structure that Mr. Jin-woo has built, prioritizing the child's well-being and happiness above any social or status considerations. A collective sigh of relief escaped the gallery. Jin-woo felt a lump in his throat, his eyes meeting Min-ji's. She smiled, tears streaming down her face, a smile of pure victory and relief. The battle was won. The melody he had found was safe. As they left the courtroom, Mrs. Lee walked past them, her eyes filled with icy hatred. She didn't say a word, but her gaze was a promise that the wound would never heal for her. But Jin-woo didn't care. He had chosen his path, his family. Outside, Ha-yoon and Ji-hoon ran to them, oblivious to the complexity of the battle that had just been fought. Ha-yoon hugged Jin-woo tightly, and Ji-hoon nestled into Min-ji. Jin-woo looked at Min-ji, then at the children. The melody was no longer fragile. It was strong, vibrant, a symphony of laughter, love, and hope. He had promised to protect that melody, and he had delivered. He had found his family, not in a contract or a lineage, but in the innocent dance of two children, in the silent love of a woman, and in the courage to build a future on his own terms. Life, he realized, wasn't about what was lost, but about what was found. And he had found everything. The melody now would play forever.